Imagine a small, cozy yogurt shop on a Friday night in Austin, Texas. The date, December 6, 1991. For teenage girls just trying to enjoy life. And their evening at a little strip mall store called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. But within hours, their lives are brutally cut short. The shop burns to ground. When firefighters sift through the ashes, they find the bodies of 4 young girls, murdered in one of the most haunting and unsolved cases in Texas history. For decades, investigators searched for answers. False confessions, wrongful arrests, countless dead ends, and years of frustration left families heartbroken. And now, 34 years later, new DNA evidence has finally revealed a suspect. This is the story of the yogurt shop murders cold case, a tragedy that shook Austin to its core, haunted generations, and may finally be on the brink of justice. Stay with me as we walk through the timeline. The crime scene, the victims, the investigations, the controversies, and the shocking new breakthrough that has breathed life into a case many thought would never be solved. This isn't just a story about murder. It's a story about memory, science, and the relentless pursuit of justice. It was a chilly Friday evening in Austin. Christmas was just weeks away. The strip mall off Anderson Lane was buzzing with life. Shoppers grabbing last-minute gifts, friends hanging out, and families stopping by for a snack. Inside the small yogurt shop, 2 employees, Jennifer Harbison, 17, and Eliza Thomas, 17, were working the closing shift. The 2 were best friends, both students at Lanier High School. They had dreams, ambitions, and were looking forward to the holiday season. Joining them that night were Jennifer's younger sister, Sarah Harbison, 15, and Sarah's best friend, Amy Ayers, 13. Amy was the youngest of the group, an animal lover with a bright future ahead. Around 10 p.m., the shop began winding down. Customers trickled out, chairs were stacked, and the cash register was balanced. Witnesses later reported seeing the girls cleaning and chatting. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. But sometime between 10:15 p.m. and midnight, something went horribly wrong. At 12:08 a.m., the Austin Fire Department responded to a call. Flames engulfed the yogurt shop. When firefighters rushed in, they expected to find an accident, maybe an electrical fire or a stove mishap. Instead, they stumbled upon one of the most chilling crime scenes the city had ever witnessed. Inside the charred remains of the shop lay the bodies of the 4 teenage girls. They had been bound, gagged, sexually assaulted, and shot execution style. The fire had been deliberately set to destroy evidence. It was a scene so brutal, so shocking, that seasoned investigators were shaken to their core. Austin in 1991 was not accustomed to violent crime of this magnitude. This was a community-oriented city, still growing, still finding its identity. The murder of 4 young girls inside a neighborhood shop shattered its sense of safety. Parents began locking doors earlier. Teens stopped hanging out at night, and a shadow of fear spread across the city. The victims' families were devastated, for young lives full of promise were extinguished in a senseless act of violence. Vigils were held. Newspapers covered the tragedy for weeks, and the police promised swift justice. But as the investigation would show, justice would not come quickly. The initial investigation began with urgency. Austin police launched one of the city's largest homicide inquiries in history. Hundreds of tips poured in. The community was desperate for answers. The crime scene, however, was badly compromised. The fire had destroyed critical evidence. Forensic technology in 1991 was limited compared to today. DNA testing was in its infancy, databases were small, and evidence preservation standards were not as rigorous as they are now. Still, investigators pressed on. They believed multiple suspects had been involved. The bindings, the execution-style shootings, and the arson all pointed to coordination. By the mid-1990s, police had developed a theory. This was not a random act. They believed young men familiar with the shop had committed the murders. Then came the confessions. In 1999, nearly 8 years after the murders, 4 men were arrested. Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, Maurice Pierce, Forrest Wellborn. The men were young at the time of the murders, teenagers themselves. Pierce, in particular, had long been on investigators' radar after being caught with a gun in 1991. The arrests were based largely on confessions obtained during intense police interrogations. Scott and Springsteen both gave statements implicating themselves and each other, but almost immediately red flags appeared. Their stories conflicted, details were inconsistent, and many parts of their confessions didn't align with known crime scene evidence. Still, prosecutors pressed forward. In 2001, Robert Springsteen was convicted and sentenced to death. A year later, Michael Scott was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. For a moment, it seemed justice had finally arrived. The families, though skeptical, hoped the nightmare might be over. But then, the cases unraveled. Defense attorneys argued that the confessions had been coerced. Detectives had allegedly pressured, manipulated, and worn down the young men during hours of questioning. There was no physical evidence linking any of them to the crime scene. By 2006, advances in DNA testing revealed that the genetic material recovered from the scene did not match any convicted man. The foundation of the case crumbled. In 2009, the convictions were overturned. Springsteen and Scott were released. Charges against Pierce and Wellborn were dropped. 18 years after the murders, Austin was back to square one. The families of the victims were devastated once again, forced to relive their trauma without closure. The community felt betrayed, and the case returned to cold case status. The yogurt shop murders became one of Texas' most infamous unsolved crimes. For the next decade, the case sat largely dormant. Detectives reviewed tips from time to time, but without new leads, there was little progress. The case haunted Austin. Every anniversary, local news stations revisited the tragedy. Community members placed flowers at the site of the old yogurt shop, which had long since been demolished. For families, each passing year was a reminder of justice denied. Parents of the victims aged without answers. Siblings grew up carrying the weight of grief. Meanwhile, advances in DNA technology continued to evolve. By the mid-2010s, forensic genealogy, the same tool that helped identify the Golden State Killer, began changing the game. Still, no breakthrough came. Until now. In 2025, Austin police made a stunning announcement. After 34 years, new DNA testing had identified a suspect. Forensic scientists had re-examined old evidence using next-generation sequencing and genealogy databases. The degraded samples once thought unusable now produced a viable genetic profile. Through painstaking work, investigators traced the DNA to a family line. Building out the family tree, they narrowed it down to one individual, a man with a history of violent crime, now living outside Texas. While authorities have not yet released the suspect's full identity pending formal charges, sources confirm that the DNA match is considered conclusive. This marks the most significant development in the case since the 1990s. For the first time, science has provided a clear suspect. Not a coerced confession, not a theory, but biological evidence tying someone directly to the crime scene. The families reacted with a mix of relief and pain. Relief that the truth might finally emerge. Pain that it took more than 3 decades to reach this point. Law enforcement emphasized that while DNA points to the suspect, the investigation is ongoing. They are building the case carefully to ensure it stands in court. No one wants another collapse like the wrongful convictions of the past. The breakthrough also highlights the power of modern forensic science. Techniques that didn't exist in 1991 or even 2001 are now solving cold cases once thought impossible. The yogurt shop murders left scars on Austin. For years, people remembered where they were when they heard the news. The case became a symbol of both tragedy and resilience. The breakthrough has reopened old wounds but also restored hope. Community members are revisiting their memories, sharing support for the victims' families, and demanding accountability. It's also sparked conversations about justice delayed. Why did it take so long? Could the wrong men have avoided prison if forensic science had advanced earlier? And how could we prevent wrongful convictions in the future? The answers aren't simple. But what's clear is this: the pursuit of justice never stopped. Before we close, it's important to remember the 4 girls, not just as victims, but as people. Jennifer Harbison, 17, a high school senior, vibrant, caring, dreaming of a career in veterinary science. Eliza Thomas, 17, responsible, hardworking, known for her kindness and laughter. Sarah Harbison, 15, full of energy, adored her older sister, loved spending time with friends. Amy Ayers, 13, the youngest, a bright spirit who loved animals and had her whole life ahead. They were daughters, sisters, friends. Their absence left holes that can never be filled. The cold case breakthrough is not just about solving crime. It's about honoring their memory and ensuring they are never forgotten. 34 years is a long time to wait for justice. For the families of Jennifer, Eliza, Sarah, and Amy, it has been a lifetime of grief and unanswered questions. But science, persistence, and memory have brought the case back to life. The new DNA evidence is more than just a lead. It's a beacon of hope that justice delayed may not be justice denied. The story of the yogurt shop murders is a reminder of how fragile life is, how devastating violence can be, and how relentless the pursuit of truth must remain. As the suspect faces a weight of evidence and the legal system moves forward, the world watches, not just to see a conviction, but to witness closure for families who have waited far too long. Because in the end, this story is not just about murder. It's about community, memory, and the unbreakable bonds of love that refuse to be erased, even by fire. This has been the story of the yogurt shop murders, a tragedy, a cold case, and now, a breakthrough. Justice may take decades, but the truth always finds a way.